Hello today. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Welcome. I'm Tom Webster, partner with Sounds Profitable. We're your host for this day and this final session, to be immediately followed by Booze and Bites, I think is what they call it. So stick around for that. It's been a fantastic day, and it's a day that has been made possible by all of our partners. We have over 150 partners now at Sounds Profitable. And also with special help from ESPN Good Karma Brands, from Magellan AI, who you're going to hear from in just a moment, from Ad Results Media, and I'm sure, where's Brian? Where did Brian go? Is he out? He's out. Of course he's out. Okay. Yes, but I want to bring out Cameron Hendricks. Cameron Hendricks is the co-founder of Magellan AI, and we've been talking about why podcasting all day. And he's going to give you a perspective on why podcasting from the data side, from one of the more important sources of data in podcasting at Magellan AI. So Cameron, thank you.
Hi there. So I'm Cameron. I'm one of the co-founders at Magellan AI. Magellan AI, we are a media planning platform, and we're a measurement platform, pixel-based attribution. So we've been around for about 8 years as a company, just past our 8-year anniversary. Have been publishing data in the podcast space since 2018. So if podcast, things change so quickly in the podcast space that podcast years are like dog years. So we have like 80 years of podcasting experience. So today we're going to be looking at some data because it's always helpful to think about why podcasting from the lens of data. And the data that we're sharing today is really about how it has worked for brands that came into the market in 2022, started testing, and then came back in 2023. And so what's nice is it works, podcasting works, but it also doesn't just work one way. So there are multiple paths up the mountain. So that's what we're going to get into. So before I actually get to the good stuff, to the data, I always like to contextualize with how do we actually go about collecting data, because it's not quite trivial. So it starts with the ad detection. It's not just scrubbing through audio and picking up an ad within that audio. We're also looking at things like, is the ad host read? Is it produced? We sample podcasts multiple times to capture dynamic insertion or ads that are inserted dynamically. So we're picking up variation in ad load. But we also pick up, again, the more organic stories. You've heard today a little bit about host-read ads. So, if there's a podcast host that is talking about how, a Casper mattress really saved their marriage, right? We're picking up, that kind of organic story. The longest ad I think we picked up is about 11 minutes in length and on a 30-minute podcast. So it was a legit ad. The host was super excited about a new sponsor. So they just went on and on about it. So we pick up those ads, and then we have to translate that into a dollar amount. So that dollar amount we're going to take a look at for a few brands in just a second. Dollar amount is going to be impacted by position, like was the ad a pre-roll or mid-roll. 15-second ads cost a different amount than a 60-second ad. Of course, we take into account download volume, so impressions, numbers as well as we compute this data. And then we factor in, was this ad run of network? Did it appear on multiple shows in the same network? We factor in programmatic. So was the ad appearing as part of a programmatic marketplace buy? So all of that is data that is used to basically compute those spend numbers that we're going to take a look at. So we looked at the engine. Now, where does the data come from? We're sampling 50,000 plus podcasts in the US. We sample in markets like Canada, the UK, Ireland, Germany, and Australia as well. We sample in 3 languages. Today, the focus is on three advertisers, I should say, in the US market, specifically in US English podcasts. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we've got a few brands here. Uncommon Goods, active since 2019. Plymouth Gin, active since 2022. And Instacart, active since 2019 as well. We are going to highlight how they came back and shifts in strategies that we observed between 2022 and 2023. Getting into the numbers, like looking at Uncommon Goods first. So this is a brand, the dark blue there is 2023 spend. As you can see, they came in Q4 of 2022. Overall in 2022 spent just under $1 million. In 2023, total spend got much closer to $2.5 million. So, significant growth there in investment. So clearly, something's working for them to come back and spend, more than double, what they spent in 2022. So what can we glean about, what worked from, the data underneath this spend? So we did a quick comparison looking at 2022 versus 2023. They were on around 122 shows with that $1 million budget in 2022. They were on 265 shows in 2023. So they added about 225 new shows and stuck with about 40 podcasts from their 2022 campaign. They came in at around the same number of networks, around 26 different networks that those shows were distributed on. Some networks, of course, they came back to and they scaled with. So they were on, for example, networks like iHeartMedia and SiriusXM, SXM in 2022, and scaled with those partners in 2023. One thing that I thought was really interesting about this particular campaign and why we wanted to highlight it is you see that big 0% for programmatic. 99% host-read ads in 2022, 94% host-read ads in 2023. So really sticking with that same host-read strategy and scaling their budget while they did so. So let's take a look at Plymouth Gen, a brand that similarly scaled, but had a completely different way of going about it. So we'll take a look at that. Similar story, active in May and June in 2022, came back in 2023 around that same time in terms of a spike in activity. Around 40K in spend in 2022, around closer to 350 in 2023. Now I know that's a budget could be a rounding error for some channels. But in podcasting, that's a decent splash. That's a good start. We like to see advertisers that come back and grow by 10 times, or just about 10 times, when they come back in the market year after year. So let's take a look at how this campaign compared year over year. Pretty different story. The one thing that's consistent, they did double the number of shows they were running on. So it went from 23 shows to 46 shows. Kept networks stable, around 6 networks. One thing we were super interested in is this 35% programmatic mix. So 35% of the ads we picked up in 2022 were programmatic. 86% of the ads we picked up as part of this campaign in 2023 were programmatic. So clearly coming back and scaling with that programmatic technology. Host-read is a small portion of this, so around 17% host-read in 2022, 13% in 2023. So it's not just a programmatic story. But again, multiple paths up the same mountain. So podcasting, we saw an advertiser like Uncommon Goods scale with host-read, and now we see Plymouth Gen, pivoting and scaling with programmatic and run-of-network ads. Let's also take a look at Instacart. So one difference for this advertiser you probably immediately spot, there's a lot more bars on this graph. So they started scaling up and then have continued to spend throughout 2023. So we first picked up Instacart in 2022, starting around April in significant form. And then in 2023, we saw that spend doubled, or nearly doubled. So we picked up around 5 million in activity in 2022, around 9 million in activity in 2023, with pretty significant activity all the way through the year. So how does this strategy look? Well, huge number of shows, spending a lot more than we looked at in the sample we looked at earlier. So 843 shows we detected Instacart ads on in 2022. In 2023, 2,300 shows, so 172% growth there. Network growth as well, so they added podcasts on the same network and they added more networks. The number of networks went from 52 to 78, so seeing quite a diversity of networks they're running on. Thought this was a good example of a strategy that stayed pretty stable, but again, included a pretty significant component of both programmatic run-of-network ads as well as host-read ads. So around 80% of the ads we picked up were programmatic, around 12 to 15%, increase to 15% in 2023 were host-read ads. So it's worth noting that that 15% stayed stable despite the fact that the number of shows went up. So they didn't just stay with the same shows and run over again. They did that in some cases, but they also added shows. So worth pointing out that they just went back and actually kept the same rough proportion of how activity looked, but actually scaled the host read and the programmatic ads across 2,300 different shows. So that's me. Thanks for joining me here. You can learn more about Magellan.ai here or connect with me on LinkedIn. As they say in the biz, please like and subscribe, or follow and subscribe these days.
I bet y'all love Jake Gyllenhaal by now. Taylor Swift wrote a whole great song about him. I'm Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable. We have an amazing panel coming up. Before I bring them out, I do want to thank the folks that helped make this day possible with us, our 160 partners, and of course, special thanks to The Roost, Ad Results Media, ESPN, Good Karma Brands, and Magellan AI for making this full day event at Podcasting really something special. So give them a hand for me if you would. And I have the pleasure of bringing out a fantastic panel on Hollywood Meets Headphones, which is going to be moderated by Molly Barton, who is the CEO and co-founder of Realm. And she'll be joined by Steve Razis, the EVP of Podcasting and Audio for Paramount, Marcia Cook, VP and Executive Producer at ESPN Films, and Anissa Amran from Monkey Paw Productions. Come on out. Take the stage and prepare to shine.
Hi there. All right. Well, I'm Molly Barton. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Realm, and I'm moderating this panel today. Excited to see you all. I'm going to give a little bit more in-depth intros to everybody on the stage with me. So on my left, Marcia Cook currently serves as Vice President Executive Producer for ESPN Films and 30 for 30. She's responsible. She's responsible for overseeing development, production, distribution, branding, and strategy of all projects under the ESPN Films umbrella, including 30 for 30. Cook joined ESPN from Vice Media Group, where she served as Senior Vice President of Global News and Special Projects. And prior to Vice, Cook spent 24 years at CBS. Let's see, we'll go to Anissa. Sorry, we changed our order. Anissa is producer of audio at Monkey Paw. She works across Monkey Paw's scripted and unscripted slate. She's worked with a team to build out the company's audio division and bring a unique perspective on the ways in which homegrown IP can serve a wider business. And then we've got Steve Razis.
I'd just like to note that if I'd known you were doing this, I would have embellished my resume much more before I sent it over.
So Steve oversees strategy, marketing, operations, and creative for the company's audio business, which has grown to become a powerful profit-generating marketing tool for Paramount Global. So he and his team produce award-winning podcasts such as The Daily Show, Ears Edition, MTV's Official Challenge podcast, On Fire with Jeff Probst, 48 Hours, and more. So I just wanted to give you a sense of some of what they're working on before we dig in. So, podcasts and film and television and the entertainment world more broadly have become increasingly intertwined in the last few years. You've got podcasts becoming TV series, you've got podcasts engaging audiences between seasons, after episodes, and lots of different iterations therein that we'll get into. So excited to dig in with this group, and I'll throw out the first question, which is, how do you think about the relationship between broadcast content and podcast content, particularly now that podcast content is becoming more video heavy? So I don't know who wants to jump in, Marcia or Steve?
Sure.
Yep.
Go. You raised your mic, and now we're going to have raising mic wars.
It's like unmuting on Zoom. It's definitely your turn.
No, this is a little hand raise.
Yeah.
We like to say that consumers don't care about our org charts, right? So at the end of the day, someone who loves The Daily Show or 48 or 60 Minutes, they just want to engage with the brand wherever it is, and so audio is another medium to engage with that brand. It's a different medium, right? And I think what makes it so exciting is the ability to go longer and to have a much more kind of intimate and authentic relationship with the consumer. So we think about it that way, right? Like, how can we extend the content? How can we sort of be an always-on conduit? And how does it live sort of within the broader franchise ecosystem?
And, okay, it works. When we think about it in terms of sports, obviously we have this renaissance of sports daily podcasts also being video. That's not exactly what I do. It's more of the narrative, long-form storytelling. The power of those video podcasts for instance, like a Pat McAfee is huge, and it has a particular place. But for us, when we think about long-form narrative storytelling, it is vast, the opportunities are rich. We can take films that initially you didn't think about as a podcast, but then you really then begin to realize what the potential is, and that's when it gets really exciting. And I think, again, the opportunities are endless.
Can I ask a question? Back.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Dialogue. Do you think about that in the development? Like when you're going in, is the idea this could be a pod, or this could be a pod that becomes a TV? Like, I'm a huge fan of the work that you guys do, and I'm always kind of curious what direction that goes in.
I would say that when I started, it was just about the pod. We thought about the film came first. Then we began to realize, oh wait, this could be a podcast. But then there's also, we look at a podcast and we say, oh my God, this has scripted potential. Right. So I would say that in the last 2 years, we are looking at projects that we can tier and say, this has endless possibilities. So I would say the landscape is changing. Yeah. But I would say that during my time, since I've joined the company, we have literally looked at opportunities with podcasts that we are almost immediately thinking, this has scripted potential.
And I'll...
Please,
because I'm going to toss this to you, which you're going to love.
Bring it right on over here, yeah.
Because I think we see it in scripted nonfiction, right? I think that path works well, and I think that the shining example, right, would be like The Dropout from ABC News, right, which then became the Hulu series, which was phenomenal. Yes. Full scripted is hard, right? And there aren't, but it's still kind of this interesting shining star. So I'm curious, we're looking at it, but we get scared. I'm curious if you have a point of view on kind of like that scripted development being, Jordan Peele and kind of what it represents.
Yeah, so just seeing it as a different way in, or?
Either way.
I think, so one of the projects that we have out was a show called Quiet Part Loud with Spotify a few years ago, and that is scripted. And it was very much born of Jordan's vision in general for all of the media that he puts out into the world. It was the idea of how can we take horror as a genre and put it out in a way that works best in this format. He understands the importance of sound. He understands how intrinsic it is to horror. Because I think something about horror is that it's people think that it's something that is affected by its external stimuli, but it's still something very personal and it's your individual internal reaction to that external stimuli. And the thing about podcast is it's very isolating. It can be a communal experience, but it's something that does take place oftentimes in your headphones, in the air of your car as you're going about your day. And so Jordan really wanted to capture that ability to take an audience and put you right at your most vulnerable. And so that was our way into scripted, was understanding the format and taking the storytelling strategies that we have in film and television and transposing it into podcasts.
Yeah, he actually said at the time that you all were releasing that, by stripping horror of all its visuals, you can focus on just conjuring dread and unease in your listeners' ears on this intimate and visceral level. I wanted us to make the scariest podcast of all time.
Oh, he said it best, yes. Oh, yes.
So, but I think to Steve's question, when you're thinking about the strategy behind releasing something first as a scripted podcast, was the idea always, this is a way to instantiate new IP that we want to do a lot more with? Or was it a little bit more like, let's get our feet wet?
I think for us, truly, our department, we're still getting started. Quiet Part Loud was our first big podcast, and we have a bunch in development. But we really do try and think first and foremost about the podcast. Down the line, fantastic. We kind of believe that there's a path forward for anything. If if the work and the material is good enough, which is always our first priority.
Right.
Yeah. So
Makes
I
sense.
think it was primarily the podcast first and foremost.
That makes sense. Well, and Marcia, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to kind of follow up with Stephen's question to me in thinking about, excellent example is The Dropout, which is part of the Walt Disney Company, Hulu, 2 seasons as a podcast, then becomes a scripted series that wins a whole bunch of awards. Then there's another example that is non-scripted, which I love, which speaks to archival and nostalgia, which would be Lady Bird, which was a podcast that kind of pulled from the archives of a woman who happened to be married to Lyndon Johnson, but I consider to be one of the first badass podcasters. She recorded every moment of her life from the moment of JFK's assassination. And that then created an opportunity for the producers at ABC News to kind of unearth all of that archival audio, create a wonderful audio experience that was history on so many levels, not just political history, women and feminism and all of those things. And then now it has recently been turned into a feature doc directed by a filmmaker that we're just crazy about, Dawn Porter, that we continue to work with. So that's another example of podcasts to non-scripted. So there are so many different avenues audio can take.
Yeah, and I think, to that point, right, like it's, and we were talking backstage, right, like we're in this interesting new moment for podcasting, right? 2023, not the best year for podcasting. Although I do think it was overblown, right? And if you look at the stats and the data, right, listening continues to go up, ad sales continue to go up. I think it was a frothy market. I think people made some iffy deals. I think we're kind of now seeing 2023 retrench 2024. I think there's more opportunity. And it's interesting for media companies such as ours, like the tape that exists in the CBS News library, archival, is astounding, right? Like what exists with 60 Minutes is astounding. So I think there are these really exciting opportunities on the nonfiction side to dig into this audio that we're talking about, right? Like the video may not be great, but audio alone can be an incredibly creative medium, to your point about like it's in your ears, you create it. So I think there's a really exciting opportunity there to create with existing tape, these incredible moments that we can then reshape. So that's certainly something we're looking at for 24.
Well, and to sort of follow up on that, because we've heard a little bit about the strategies at each of your companies looking backward, and orienting toward narrative content, thinking about scripted content, and we haven't gotten so much into the strategy that you've been following, Steve, but I'd love to hear you all talk about how that strategy has shifted in the last couple of years. I mean, certainly the market has changed the tone and changed the opportunities in terms of big platforms, spending big dollars on deals that maybe didn't pan out. So that certainly informs, publishers' approaches, but I'd just love to hear you sort of dig in a little bit on that.
I think that, our strategy is changing, and I think what we're doing is there's, as Stephen was saying, there's been a bit of market correction. So I would say that we are now looking at strategy and insights and data, and that's not to say that the data is driving our creative decisions. It's more looking at, did this work? Why did it work? Let's see if we can replicate that, but it's not to say that that's going to be the driving force, because this space, the audio space, allows us to be so incredibly creative. We can take bigger swings in a way because there are so many different kinds of opportunities to find new talent, to experiment, and that's the part that I think we're really kind of digging into. But then we're also flexing a bit more. We're looking at what are the opportunities within the Walt Disney Company, the larger company, to work with our partners across the aisle, to borrow a political phrase. But I think that we're looking at not so much being siloed, but how can we work more within, and I know you have that experience as well, being part of Paramount, but I think we're looking at more opportunities to partner with radio, to partner with ABC News. How can we extend the reach and create that virtuous cycle or that flywheel of our content so that we can, and that's how we also attract new talent, because that new talent is not just going to say to themselves, oh, this is going to be a great 30 for 30. They're going to say, wait, I'm going to be a part of the Walt Disney Company. And there's a way for me to take this content and really spread it across the entire ecosystem. So I think in my short time with 30 for 30 and ESPN, 2 years and a couple of months, but who's counting, after spending almost 24 and a half years at one company, I think it's an opportunity for us to really flex, and that part I'm really enjoying.
Cool. I think for us, we're kind of working in a different space, coming from a production company that we're known for scripted, we're known for narrative storytelling, and as we had done with Quiet Part Loud, released in 2022, I think the initial conceit of our department opening up was, okay, we're going to focus on scripted podcasts, we're going to go into finding the scariest stuff we can do, and that still is something that we really are interested in. We have stuff that we are developing in that direction, but I think that there has been a growing understanding that scripted can be expensive, scripted can be, difficult to get all the moving parts together, and that's not to say that those things aren't worth it, of course not, but I think we've started to expand our view of what our department can be as in the way that it can expand the brand of Monkey Paw. And so for us, what that means is understanding that Monkey Paw is also about mischief, and Jordan Peele's brand and audience, they're aware of his comedic background. And so we're kind of expanding a little bit further into the comedic side and seeing what we can do in unscripted that will service both genres.
I like that. I like the mischief.
Yeah.
That feels on point, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot at Paramount, right, about the idea that, like, a little bit similarly, like, it's not Paramount as a brand, right, but it's the shows that are kind of like the lodestones or the North Stars, whether it's 48 or Daily Show or CBS Sports. But podcasting allows you to play in much more kind of broad areas, right? Because the costs are lower, because you get to be a little bit more kind of dynamic. And so I think that gets really exciting. And I think for us, as a strategy moving forward, it's a combination, right? So one, looking at kind of the broader Paramount strategy, like, we're focusing on the biggest brands we've got. We are focusing on what will move the needle. We are focusing on what is going to have the most impact collectively for the company. And so it is things like, but that also work for podcasting, right? So 48 Hours, true crime, fantastic. Let's blow that out. Daily Show, comedy and news. Jon Stewart's come back, fantastic. Where are the opportunities there? Sports, huge opportunity. So it's sort of that Venn diagram, right? You want to kind of find the points where you're strong and then double or triple down. And then I would say you still have those kind of developmental swings,
of course,
but right? I think, to your point, for whatever reason, right, there was this kind of bizarre amnesia 2 years ago where, like, we all thought we could just keep doing 6-episode scripted limited series and the money would kind of appear. And they're hard. They're beautiful. They are what give us joy. We did a series called Agent of Betrayal through CBS News that is amazing, and people should check it out. But, like, we did it kind of understanding the economics behind it, right? And I think, to your point, right, there is a much more kind of studious, smart, quantitative approach that allows you to ideally do both.
Well, and I think some of that is about sort of reframing how you think about the RSS feed. I mean, a lot of the companies that we're working with and with our own originals at Realm, we're focused on thinking of the RSS feed as a programming channel that's not necessarily a singular show, but more about a category or a franchise, and it could be a combination of scripted and unscripted, or there could be a season in the year where you premiere a scripted series on an otherwise unscripted feed. So there's a lot of creativity going on that I think is just really exciting as people dial into what's actually going to move the needle audience-wise and what makes sense, from a business perspective in terms of, building up a significant enough audience to sell ads against.
I mean, I think the one thing that all of us here, and for any people who are developing pods, is quietly being said again and again and again, is what's your always on strategy, right? And you are watching big brands that used to be seasonal or otherwise shift, right? Because podcasting is crowded still, right?
Yeah.
5 million shows, 50 million episodes, mean download of 284.001% monetized. Like, that part's tough, but creating an always on brand, creating something that's got continuity, that's got a cadence, that allows you to build audience, that allows advertisers to come in, that creates a connection. That's, we look at the stuff that Tom Webster showed, right? The efficacy of podcast advertising is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I was saying to Tom, like, the stats look made up. They're so good. And so, if you can create, I just think you have to be more intentional.
Yeah.
Right? We all have to kind of we have to show the rigor of this needs to be an always on thing. We need to grow it this way. And then if that connection happens, then the monetization becomes that much easier, but it's different now.
But then if you also just think about what the Hollywood strategy is, they are looking at the tried and true. They want things that they know will have a already dedicated fandom audience, that the listenership will be there. So those evergreen stories are the space in which we most particularly live in. And many of those evergreen stories are steeped in nostalgia. And that nostalgia brings with it a core audience. So those stories that speak to a different time, a different place, but yet you have some knowledge of it and familiarity, means that the audience will come with it. And I think that that's the Hollywood part of our conversation today, and how they're looking at what are the kinds of IP that they know will be almost a guarantee of some sort of success. And I think for us at ESPN, that's our secret sauce. We are steeped in nostalgia. We're steeped in evergreen stories that you go back to our library and you can listen to time and time and time again. They're enjoyable. They remind you of a time and a place, as I've said, and they oftentimes make you feel good, but at other times it's that intersection between culture and sport, and you can apply something from that story to today. And oftentimes you find that nothing has changed.
Thank you for that. We've touched on some of the challenges in sort of thinking about taking, big existing brands from the broadcast space and interpreting them in audio in an additive way. But if, does that spark anything for you in terms of creative challenges, business challenges, legal challenges that you feel like are worth digging into a bit to aid other people who are on their journey in development?
I like the collective pause on this one. For us, we are an audio group in a linear company. And so it is important, and I remind the team and myself, for us to remember that generally the tail isn't going to wag the dog, right? So the linear product is going to come first. That is how we approach everything we go into, from The Daily Show to 48 to Star Trek to CSI to NCIS. You start from there. Once you do that, you approach the EP and you have to get them on board, right? You have to kind of, you probably know this more from the film, but you can't pound the table and make it happen. When the joy of where I am is that I get giant, amazing IP to play with. The challenge is I have to get people on board. And so you have to build trust and rapport, right? You have to tell them and you have to make them understand that you're not going to damage the IP, that you're going to make it work. But then as you establish that, then so many worlds open up, right? So many opportunities. And I think, and then you see the shows get excited because you can broaden the audience. You can go in different directions. We can take Jordan Klepper, who is an amazing correspondent and gets maybe 3 to 5 minutes on the show, and give him 45 to do Jordan Fingers a Conspiracy, and put that on video, right? And that is, by the way, amazing. Totally worth it for everyone. You should check it out. But it's such a phenomenal showcase for him and such a joy, for him and for us, right? To give talent that ability to run and kind of play with it. The same thing with 48 Hours and My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty. But I do think it's this fascinating discovery process from the start, right? Of like, you got to talk to the show, you got to see if the show is excited, you have to, like, if the passion isn't there, then it doesn't happen. And the other thing is, like, sometimes there isn't a good podcast. Right? And you kind of have to admit that to yourself as well. Like, for us, hit show does not equal hit podcast. And that's a tough moment. But we've also learned, like, listen, if you don't figure that out, if you don't say no, then you launch a podcast that is not a hit, and then 6 months from that, like, everyone's disappointed. So you have the EP conversation, you get people excited, you got to find kind of your evangelist within it. And then, you know, we talk about it even for named IP, right? It needs to be highly differentiated and premium content. And so the last one, then I'll stop.
Yeah.
But so, I like to talk. And I have one good example. You've said the notes are very good. They're just branded notes. Very impressive show. I mean, come on. It's like being on a game show. It's just insanely well done. We were looking to do a Survivor podcast. I'm a big Survivor fan. If you're going to do a Survivor podcast, you have to talk with Jeff Probst. So we did a call with Jeff. And you know, in the back of our head, we're like, Jeff would obviously be the best host, but we're not going to get Jeff, and we were told we weren't going to get Jeff. Do the call. Jeff has idea after idea after idea, and then we get to the host discussion, and he goes, well, who do you think we should host? And we're kind of like, you should host. You would be the best host. And then Jeff agreed, and that for us is huge differentiation for the fans, and now you're producing a podcast that no one else can produce. And I think we talk about that a lot, right? How is this something that only we can do? How is this something that really does stand out in those 50 million? So I think that's the other thing that for us really kind of matters.
Go ahead.
Now I'm not sure what I was going to say.
Oh,
no, I got it.
It's too long, I know. I monologued.
When I think about IP and how we can mine IP, I'm not even sure how this relates to your initial question, because I think I'm, again, bouncing off of my colleague here. We had a piece of IP called The Sterling Affairs, written by Ramona Shelburne, who is an extraordinary journalist. And it was the outrageous, unbelievable story of a man named Donald Sterling, and a piece of tape. And a piece of tape that gave us everything that you could want in a sensational story that even involved TMZ. I think this made TMZ legit. You had a mistress, you had paparazzi, you had race, you had the NBA, you had billionaire, money, no rock and roll, because I was about to say sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but there was no rock and roll. Rodeo Drive. It was just unbelievable. And that singular piece of IP for ESPN then became a podcast that was one of the, if not the most successful podcasts for the 30 for 30 brand. It had a binge drop rate or something. Megan Judge will correct me on my language here, but the binge drop was unbelievable. People listened to that podcast one episode after another, and it has now been turned into, wait for it, scripted. It drops on FX in June, starring Lawrence Fishburne as Doc Rivers. And it's going to be, my team knows this, the phrase is, it's going to be fire. So that is a piece of IP that started in our house. And that's what we want to really exploit going further, because we have so much of it.
Talk about a pathway. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
What I wanted to speak to was kind of the idea of what it takes as far as like legal and creative challenges in any adaptation of pre-existing IP. I think there's a very famous piece of horror IP that is older, and when you're viewing something that has passed through many different hands, it's often, you'll find that lots of different parts of the IP are owned by different people. And so if you find that you don't have access to a certain part of the story, but you have access to a different part of the story, that's when creative can solve the legal issue. And so that, I think, is the reason why podcast, working audio first, at least for us, is so important, because, okay, you can't use JSON, but you can use Camp Crystal Lake. What is the sound version of that? What lives, and it gives you the opportunity to potentially make something that will work with the format more, and in the medium, way more than if you try and superimpose something deeply visual. It's just one for one. So I think you have that opportunity.
And then I think here, this is when people ask, who are your favorite people to work with inside your company? And I always say legal, because and rights and clearances, because you need, and finance, you need them to be your friends, because many podcaster creators come in saying fair use. It's like no. We're not a fair use company. We're the Walt Disney Company, and we are not going to be fair using.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Going back a ways, I learned pretty quickly that if I didn't go and smoke cigarettes, or at least stand around while the smoking was happening with the contracts and the legal department, nothing would happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
I didn't actually have to smoke. I just had to be present while smoking was happening. This is pre-podcast.
So the takeaway
different
is
industry.
go illegal, start smoking cigarettes, and then
You'll
just
get what you
fair
want.
use it.
You'll get what you want.
The best panel ever.
Looping back to what you were saying, Steve, about that tricky conversation where it's such precious IP for the company, and you want to try to get in there and expand the opportunity. You've got to come in and pitch something that makes sense for the format, complements and expands the scope of the IP that you're dealing with. So there's that part. So hopefully you jump through all those hurdles, get the people excited. But then there's the sort of meat and potatoes, or bread and butter, of how are you actually going to expand the audience? Like, what does that actually look like? You have to make something good, but what else is in that equation?
Well, evidently you have to smoke a lot of cigarettes. Which is new to me, so we figure that out. Yes, it's all about audience growth. I think it is fairly idiosyncratic, depending upon the show. But for us, right, it's the idea that podcasting reaches a different audience, period, right? And that was backed up by the data earlier today. So, what do they call them? The non-reachables, I believe?
Yeah.
So, but that's really powerful for a lot of brands, right? This idea that you can get 20% of the audience that didn't exist. And we see that in studies that we've done around The Daily Show, right? Where the pod drove 80% of an increase of an affinity for the show, 80% for the host, and I think it was 70% that they would re-engage via linear, fast, or digital. But you do have to kind of figure out how you're going to market, where you're going to market. I think, still in-podcast audio and barter deals are really important. If you've got a good host, if you're a good host, getting on other pods, that is, earned media, that's fantastic. Smart, effective digital and social campaigns, I think, work. We are getting deeper on video, right? So that also, it's a huge amount of discussion around video and, is it cannibalistic? How does it kind of work? But overall, I think the reality is, YouTube remains, or is, the top platform, or one of the top platforms for podcast discovery, which is a stat when you first hear it as a podcaster, kind of like scratching your head. And I still want to kind of understand what is background listening versus watching, but you can't ignore it. Right? And so I think you have to kind of take all those things into account. And then the other thing too is, like, you have to think about your audience, right? Where is your audience? How are you reaching that audience? And then again, how do you kind of cross-pollinate? So the final example, right? CBS Sunday Morning, we have a show called Mobituaries. In that case, we started the show, we got 20 or 30,000 downloads. We then shot a promo with Mo Rocca, on CBS Sunday Morning talking about how you use the app, click on the button, the whole thing, and it 10x'd our audience. Now in that case, we're driving from linear to pod.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But it is, we've also proven we can drive backwards. So that kind of virtuous circle, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm. And then I think with audience engagement for us, because we are the worldwide leader in sports, we have a unbelievable integration team. And that integration team works like nobody's business. So they are looking at all of the shows, whether it be, First Take, Stephen A. Smith, integration within some of the sporting events that we cover, where there is a synergy and a natural, organic way to, an Eagles game. And then we've got the Reggie White film and then the Reggie White podcast. He was a great Eagle along with a great Green Bay Packer. So then we take that information and we flood the zone with that. So I think being inside of a really large company allows us to integrate in ways that are creative. We are oftentimes challenged by social, because live sports comes first. So we have to be really creative in how we market our content. But I think that with the evolution of our team and teams, we're really thinking more strategically, not living inside our wonderful bubble of we're creatives.
Yeah.
Which is a challenge because we're creatives and we don't really want to talk about anything else. But we need to get our work out there, and that's how we engage new audiences, and thinking creatively on how we can engage those audiences around a piece of content or a theme, I think is providing us with even more opportunities to kind of push the envelope and where our audience can hear and see more about what we create.
And the one thing I would say to that too that I thought was really interesting is, as podcasters, you again, I think a little bit myopically, certainly, when we first thought about social and digital, we were just like, we just want to kind of like get our ads out, right? But the people on those channels are like, no, it needs to be content.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If you give us stuff that just kind of floods,
nobody wants to see a promo.
Nobody wants to see a promo.
Sorry.
Right?
I mean, for promo creators out there, but
no, but they want to see. Listen, Christ, the whole Survivor podcast is inherently a promo for Survivor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it's the idea that it's compelling content. But I think it is the idea that for us as podcasters too, to recognize like it has to be compelling content in all channels, right? And that took us some time to kind of realize like, oh, okay, you're right. Like your social channel is highly curated. And so we can't just put an ad in for the Daily Show. It needs to be something that really engages. Once you figure that out, then I think you end up with, it's more compelling across the board.
Well, it's like having conversations now where we're like, can we make a video promo for our podcast? That's like, yeah. I know it may feel like, 1980 for some, but for us, we had not done that, I think, on a regular basis effectively. And now that's being factored into our overall strategy, where back in the good old days of news, when you had all this extra content, people would come to us and say, what's the web extra? Right. It's like, oh my God, just shoot me right now. But that was a thing once upon a time.
Right.
Now that's already baked in. You're not even it's not even a question.
Well, so with this kind of line of thinking and conversation, it's got me wondering, okay, well then where are the budgets coming from for production? Is it really some of these things viewed as marketing for the other properties, or is it separate pot of money? Because I think, as I think about the value of the podcast content for Survivor, you not only have the podcast content, but I assume you can slice and dice and use that on social media, and it becomes part of your overall sort of halo around the property, just as all of that social content had been prior to audio getting integrated. So any thoughts on how to think about that? Because some of the partners that we work with when we're producing for other companies are literally taking some money from marketing, some money from development, and patching together what they need. So I don't know if that's familiar or if you just have a separate way of looking at it.
This was not on our list of approved questions.
Okay, we can move on.
No. I think the honest answer,
Yeah.
again, in a time when everyone is looking tightly at budgets, is you need to go in at the top understanding what pods are kind of profit generating and what pods are marketing based. And if a pod is marketing based, as we talked about, right? And we talked about like sort of around the tentpole, what's the value it's going to bring? And then it's an equation.
Right.
Right? So the idea is, okay, if this is a marketing based pod and it's going to cost you $200,000 and it's going to run 8 episodes over this many weeks and to generate this many million impressions with this audience, great. Then the marketing team can look at that and determine within the overall campaign, does it make sense? I think that hasn't been done enough in the past.
Right.
We're doing it now, and it makes it much easier, because then it's math and a marketing decision versus kind of, as we talked about, right? Like, there was a moment in the past where everyone just thought, okay, like you walk into the studio and hit the make podcast button and the podcast pops out.
Yeah.
And great. And it's like, no, they cost money, there's time, there's opportunity cost, there's a lot. So you really want, what we do at the top is we have a green light process. We have an extensive data-backed green light process with budgets and P&Ls and LRPs and pilots to determine, like, what is this? What purpose does it serve? How much money will it or will it not make? What is the marketing impact? And then does this make sense? And because you need to get past, kind of that, and it's a great process, and we are all in this business because we love creative, right? But it gets you past kind of that sugar rush of the brainstorm where you think you've got a great idea, but you still need to stress test it.
Right.
And I think that's the hard but important moment that we now do. And that, honestly, like, we've lost 70% of pods. And those are, but in the right way. Those were the right choices. And I think that rigor is important.
And I would say that we're in a similar space, but our thinking has always been, how does this serve the fan? And that has always been our first priority. Now I think there's a healthy mix of serving the fan, creating premium content every single time, and how can this also help us build revenue? And I think that is an honest assessment of where we are as a company, and I think we're being really much more strategic, but yet each and every time, is this something that's going to serve our audience well, and how will we engage this audience? And for us, we're sports, but we're also, my favorite phrase, besides fire, engaging an audience, engaging fans. What's the fandom aspect of all of this? And will this be something that really engages and stimulates the average audience listener to that beautiful, magical intersection between sports and culture? And that means that if it succeeds, or even if it's a little like sports adjacent, we get to play in other spaces that are a part of the larger ESPN, Walt Disney ecosystem. So if it doesn't quite work for us in our feed the way that we want, we have other places where we can market it and think about it in a different area. And the same is true for other parts of the company. So if ABC News produces a fabulous series on the Negro Leagues, or the Negro League, and it's doing okay, then they come to us and they say, can we put this in your feed? And we saw, when we said yes, we saw the audience grow exponentially.
Opportunity for a second life in that capacity.
And it's all about, like, I want any piece of audio content within our ecosystem to have multiple lives.
And the one thing I'd say beyond that, right, is it's a great point. The scorecard is more than just revenue, right? So, like, it's expanding the franchise, expanding the universe. We talk a lot about the fact that listen, there's a certain amount of money that we'll make, but if we can create more fan engagement, if we can really expand the franchise, that's where podcasting, whether it's ESPN or CBS Sports or anything, that's the value. I think actually that's even the bigger value, right? That's what's
brand expansion.
Well, it's think about podcasting. I was talking with someone about this.
A dirty phrase.
I know, but podcasting is one of the few mediums that can still legitimately mint stars, right? And in a way
it's
that
personality
almost
forward and
nothing else. So we're even talking about. I mentioned so many other brands that my PR people are going to be upset about, but Smartless, right? Those were 3 well-established actors who are all great, and yet their profile now is so much higher because of that podcast. People know them, they understand them. So again, I think the medium's ability to kind of enter the zeitgeist and be so much bigger is real. And that's constantly exciting. You can have a pod that can have a phenomenal impact if you do it right.
I want to open it up to you guys for questions, so start getting those together. I'm going to ask one last question of our panelists here. So future trends. What trends do you sort of foresee for the next couple of years in this intersection between Hollywood and podcasting?
I want to hear from you because you're in this space that I find so incredibly interesting, and working with Jordan Peele must be extraordinary, full stop.
Oh, fantastic.
But the genre of horror is terrifying. I'm the person you don't have at the dinner party with the bad jokes.
I support that.
No, it was good. It was good. I appreciated it. So this is very much what we got into the podcast game for. We do believe that horror is something that lives tremendously in this space. Like I said earlier about the vulnerability and the intimacy about it, I do think that it's very much scripted is a space that can still grow, and it's one of those things where you're going to have to put a lot into it, and it's not going to have the same. It's not going to have the same safety of an always on, but I think that as we put more content out into the space, you're going to be able to see how things like Homecoming have been previous examples of successful funnels into adaptation. But I think that there's a lot more coming, especially with a lot of the technology that's coming out with Dolby Atmos, and there's a lot of different things that will very, very. I'm trying to not say things that we are currently doing because I'm not allowed to. And if you can hear me tripping on that, it's because I'm like, don't say that, don't say that. But yeah, we're really excited about
it's a
our
safe
place in that
space
stuff.
here.
Thank you.
There's no media here.
Cone of silence. I can just no.
It's good. Don't worry about the cameras. They'll love this.
Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, I'm with you on horror and scripted. I mean, it's interesting, right? We talked a little bit about this backstage as well. I think in the podcasting world, as I think about how I'm going to say this, there is, especially in spaces like scripted and horror, which I think all of us agree makes sense, feels like it's going to work. If something's going to pop, I think it's going to probably be genre horror. I think there's a world where we collaborate more and discuss more. I think it is not necessarily where everyone heads, but again, I think it's a rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
The idea is we need to land more points on board in the space, right? We need continuity. We need people who, podcast brings people in for Serial, and then they don't know where to go. They bring them in for, any kind of big moment. They bring them in for the Dropout. They bring it, and then they disappear, right? So if we're doing scripted horror, and you do something that is amazing, where do we point them?
Exactly.
Right.
How are we going? And so there's an interesting kind of rallying cry for all of us to kind of think, because I also think that the medium benefits from that. I think we all believe scripted can work. It's just hard. I know we've been talking about that as well. So yeah, I think it's incredible, and it's incredibly exciting to have creators like Jordan Peele.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Completely. Yeah.
Oh my God. So, but how you crack that and how you kind of get the proof case, I think will be very interesting.
I think that when you think about the future trends, I think podcasting is going to become even more competitive. I think that the opportunities for smaller independent creators to come to houses like ours, ESPN, and pitch their stories because they have a knowledge that we are a larger production company, if you will. And that was exemplified so beautifully where I first met this gentleman in row number 2 at On Air Fest in Brooklyn. And we had 2 days where creators just pitched us. They sat in a room with us, and I think we got, 3, 4 interesting pitches that we're going to. I'm nodding to my team, my beautiful team. Development queen is here, Conti Fernandez. Sorry, just got to give her a shout out. Maria Delgado, Megan Judge, my team. We took great pitches, and they are small, independent podcast creators, and they sat in the room with us. We poked holes in certain cases, and in others, we were like, "Oh my God, this is fabulous. Let's make a date." So I think that's a little bit of a future trend. But the other thing that I want to stress that we've not touched upon is independent, extraordinary creators in the podcast space allow for more diversity. There is such opportunity for creators to work in this space, and as you say, we discover new and extraordinary talent, because this is the space where you can play in, you can be innovative, you can experiment, and that's when Hollywood comes a-callin', which is part of our Hollywood Meets Headphones. So I now toss back to our wonderful moderator to open the floor for questions.
Yes, thank you guys. All right, who's right over here
Button on
in
it.
front?
It was good.
Amazing panel. I'll give you guys the Oscar.
We will accept.
So my company's putting significant resources into developing a new IP, and we're going to be producing a audio drama in Dolby Atmos, actually, BBC in London, 6-part series with an accompanying graphic novel, a series of books aging from young to mature audiences, all within the same universe. Anyways, kind of risky. We're expecting a loss for a while, but we're going to be shooting a feature film in 2026 with some of these stories. Anyways, acknowledging the initial financial challenges in favor of long-term world building, could you share insights on navigating the creation of new IPs through audio podcasts, audio dramas, and specifically, how can we leverage these mediums effectively to build an audience for a new world?
Well, first, can I just say,
Yeah.
wow.
Goodness.
You had me at long-term world building.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I'll toss to my esteemed colleague right here. So go for that.
Sure, no, I'm happy to dig in.
I'm
actually.
just trying to take it all in.
Yeah.
Or Molly.
Yeah, I can.
Molly.
Yeah, there you go.
I actually do this all the time.
Amazing.
So I think the important thing is the commitment that you're making, because you have to get to a certain number of episodes in a given period of time to have a chance of building an audience. So I mentioned maybe 20 minutes ago the thinking of the RSS feed as a programming channel rather than, and being sort of flexible in that. So the more you can sort of commit to 30 plus episodes in a year, or partner with other people so that you can build the feed over time with similar content, the easier it's going to be. If you can figure that out, it's just going to be so much easier. Happy to talk afterward.
I'll also quickly note, I think sequencing, right? Like all of those things are going to be data points, and it needs to be iterative, right? So if something comes out and they're not responding to a character, but how that works with feature production, like it's great. You have a lot of things going on, but the number of different lead times when things lock, And so it's worth thinking about how you want to sequence that.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to ask about some of the new audiences, not just how do we sell more and expand. I say this after spending last weekend with 80,000 of my closest friends at Emerald City Comic-Con who are into anime and manga and those types of visual layer. And if you ask them about whether you're into TV and this character or movie, the answer is yes. It's
Right.
this giant smear across there. So my question is, what are some of the ways that you can start thinking about a pod that will have a visual layer, but it's not going to be all video, that it will have appeal that goes from full video all the way down to just cover art?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, there's a,
Especially horror.
I'm happy.
I think the first step, because this is something that we have kind of had to approach with any story or any project that we've even considered any form of development on. It's something as simple as taking the concept, taking a proof of concept, and closing the video or closing your eyes and just. I know this is such a silly response, but does it make sense? Does somebody who has not heard the concept previously and has not seen the visual material, if they were to just hear it, can they follow it? Do they understand this? If it's scripted, do they understand the story? Okay, well then fantastic. So that's step one, I would say. But I think that thinking of the visuals as supplemental material, so maybe something that expands upon it. So for example, no idea what it would be, but if it's the characters are playing a game or something, you don't have to necessarily see those elements, you can see it later. Or if there's a fight sequence or something that doesn't have to be visualized, but you have to be able to live it and feel it in the moment in audio, and then that can be supplemental. So I would be thinking about it in those terms.
I would just tag on to that. There's some interesting experimentation, as you'd imagine, going on with AI animation of audio, scripted audio. It's okay in terms of quality, but I'm sure it will improve. I'm also interested in kind of half-step measures where there's some visual engagement that complements the listening experience, whether that's like an illustration, like you think about at the end of the Mandalorian episodes, there's the production sketches, like, something like that where it's in the zone of what you're hearing and it's related, but it's not animation.
Complements it, not informs it necessarily.
Yeah.
Audio manga theater. Remember.
Yep,
Wow.
that sounds cool.
Okay.
Thank you. This has been so insightful. I'm wondering about the timeline of development, and if you could speak a little bit about your different processes. We talked a little bit about the data-backed greenlight process. I'm really interested in that, especially in TV and film festival. There's been so many different ways to talk about development, but in TV, it takes so long. So I'm wondering about the timeline in the audio industry, and then also, Marsha was talking about independent creators. Is there a tendency in the podcast industry as well to have like the big breakout creator that's the person that we want to work with? Like they just need to have that one podcast that was a hit, and then maybe that's the person. Like they have their own brand that then we follow and want to work with, or is that something that you don't see as much in the industry?
I'll start with your second question, and thank you for that question. I would say that tendency, and I'll ask my colleagues to follow up, that tendency to go and work with the more established, bigger podcast creator has not been our reality. I think that we have been a home for new creators. A wonderful example, though she's not completely new, she did the Dolly Parton series that I think won a Peabody, Shima Olei, and it was Pink Card, which won a ton of awards for us. Very, very successful. And she took her experiences growing up as an Iranian American and looked at the decades-long struggle of Iranian women to enter a soccer stadium. It happened to fall at the same time as the World Cup when Iran was trying to qualify, and women on the streets of Iran were ripping off their hijabs. She is maybe known a bit in the podcast space, but not like working with like a story syndicate and Liz Garbus in the film space. So I would say that the tendency for us is we want new and original storytellers. That gives us an opportunity to go to our manga radio theater gentlemen, an opportunity to work with new, innovative creators in different spaces that for us, we are really committed to not just meat and potato sports stories, but innovative stories that stretch how we define sport. So I would say that we're not like the other folks that may tend to go with the more well-known entity in podcasting. I think we like to try things that are new and different. And then our timeline, I think our timeline is so much better than in any other industry because we can take our time and we want it to be rich and the sound design should take you to another place and have you experience something that your ears will delight in. So I would say, I mean, outside of like getting contracts through legal, which always takes a minute.
Yes.
That's so true.
Did I say we were the Walt Disney Company? But it takes a minute, but it's worth the wait. I hope I don't get in trouble for that. But I got my team here. They'll support me. You got me, girls? Excellent. I do think that we allow for that time because we want to understand your process. We want to help you through that development process. We want to make sure that we are that place where your vision can really be explored. We like to consider ourselves a house for directors and production companies, and we want to support that vision. And if that vision takes a minute, then we're here for it. And we like to tie our stories into opportunities that will allow for maximum audience listenership, and that might take a minute.
Well, I think we're out of time, but
but
if no
this
one
one
tells us we have to stop, ask your
Go
question.
for it, go for it, go!
Hey, my name's Eric Pochkow. I'm the Sex-Kin Dreamer. That's my podcast, Sex-Kin in the City. And I was curious, like, so if you have that, speaking to what you were just speaking, like, you're creating and you're, writing and you're definitely doing podcasts, or you have an IP that you're like, I think this should be developed and is interesting. Who would you contact in your world or in that world? Like, who would be best to say this person will actually listen to, say, an email or say a shot? Like, who would you give your shot in the dark or your elevator pitch? And like, does that
Our
make sense?
development team.
Right.
Yeah, our development team. So
you
you can, just send an email. We have a wonderful pitch process. You send an email to us, we respond, we have you sign a little waiver which protects you, and we take several hundred pitches a year, and we do our best to get back to every single solitary person. So I would say if you want to pitch us, we'll give you an email. Get in the door, and we'll listen, or first read your pitch and then respond.
I'll also say the one thing that's great about podcasting versus any other medium is you can just put it up there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So like, let's take Normal Gossip, right? I think Normal Gossip, I mean, listen, there are only so many hits, but Normal Gossip was, I think, kind of the platonic ideal of kind of a quiet podcast hit where like, it came out, it wasn't backed by kind of any major names, it just picked up noise during the pandemic, right? And so I kind of heard about it, then I heard about it some more, then I heard about it some more, and at some point it kind of reaches this interesting critical mass. So yes, listen, it's a crowded space, but there is a bit of a meritocracy to it. So I would pursue both paths. If you've got a great idea, put it out there, promote it, figure out cross-promotion, figure out earned media, talk to your friends and build. It's not impossible.
Absolutely. I like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're wrapped. Thanks so much.